Hi, my name is Param. I'll be talking about my research and some adventures with trying to synthesize gold nanoparticles and recycling them in the lab. The reason I became interested in this work is our lab is primarily an environmental chemistry lab, and I have been working with gold since I joined the group. For example, that's gold salt. We wanted to get to nanoparticles. This is how it normally looks, like a yellow solution. Once you get it to nanoparticulate size, it looks like red wine. That's what this pink color is. Should I keep moving with that?
You're fine, you're fine.
Now, one way to get this gold salt to this gold nanoparticulate state is to reduce it using certain harsh reducing agents. These are a couple examples. I primarily work with sodium borohydride. This blows up at room temperature. This gives you cancer. So I stick with this for the most part. There's another approach, which is to, instead of getting into these things, try to get some plant extracts and bio-based chemicals to get the reduction done. It's a much milder approach, and it has been shown to be feasible. But there are purity issues you run into. But the intuitive argument often made is that this is more sustainable than the conventional approaches because we're using plant-derived chemicals. Now, so we're talking about synthesis, and we're saying that if we go this route using plant-derived chemicals, it is sustainable, but is it true from a zoomed-out life cycle point of view? As a chemist, I did not have this question. But before getting into this research, I was working with sustainable biofuels at Michigan State, where I ran into these kinds of intuitive arguments versus reality issues. That's when I started to do some life cycle assessment of this system. So for the initial stage, we looked at just 1 milligram of gold as a functional unit. This is just the synthesis piece. So yes.
Try it now.
Sorry about that.
So it's just from the cradle to gate that this data is from. And it turned out to be like this. The first three are all synthetic chemicals. The last two are plant-derived alternatives. We did this for about 13 different synthesis types, and this was the trend. And at this point, I had what can be described as a crisis of faith, because I've been doing the synthesis for more than a year at that point, because I wanted to study the mechanism of these green synthesis approaches, because they must be green, they must be good, and then this came up. So this angrily written paper, but I said, okay, that was probably not the best approach. The other insight we got was that much of the cumulative energy demand and consequently much of the environmental impact was tied to the gold itself. So with the upstream mining and refining steps. So if you're trying to replace something like sodium citrate, which is the reducing agent in this case, and you're trying to replace that with a plant-derived alternative, we are attacking a tiny piece of the problem. So what if we started to do this? What if we try to recycle that in the labs here? So that's how I got into this recovery and recycling of gold. Now, in a broader context, it is an important question, because gold, many of the platinum group metals, many of the rare earth elements, they all have resource limitation that we are bumping up against. And as the gold nanotechnology industry is poised to grow in the future, it is going to clash against resource limitations. Now, of course, the nanotechnology industry is not the biggest consumer of the gold, but it makes sense with upcoming industries to tie recycling and recovery into the paradigm of those industries. And it's not just true for gold and these rare earths, it's also true for more supposedly common and abundant elements. And in the recent literature, there have been approaches where they're trying to get precious metals and rare earths, interesting approaches from unexpected places. And this has been primarily done with anthropogenic waste streams as well as from natural systems. This came out a few days ago in ISSST. So at this point I said, okay, I'm sold, I need to get the gold out from nanoparticle waste. Now, the approaches were cyanide and mercury. If you know anything about those, you should be working in the lab with those. So I started to look for wimpy, non-cyanide and non-mercury ways to do that. And I came across this chemical, the cyclodextrin. This is what Febreze uses, the air freshener. The way this works is cyclodextrin has a truncated cone-like shape. It has a hydrophobic cavity, meaning something that does not like to dissolve in water will fit in that cavity if the conditions are right and you induce it to do so. But it has a hydrophilic exterior, meaning it can dissolve in water by itself. So what Febreze does is it has this nice smelling chemical in that cavity. When you spray it, it gets released, that nice smelling chemical gets exchanged with a nasty smelling chemical, and that's what you smell. And that nasty smelling chemical gets hidden in the cavity, and that's why you don't smell that. And the pharmaceutical industry has used it to dissolve many of the insoluble drugs. And it turns out that if you have gold in its brominated form, potassium in the system, and the right kind of pH, temperature conditions, and some black magic, some voodoo, and a lot of good luck, this happens. It took a long time to get this to happen, but it does start to form these kinds of linear needle-like structures held together by hydrogen bonding. Now, these needles tend to grow in the axial directions, and they also tend to self-associate. Now, when they self-associate, they precipitate out of the system. And if you're following the story, we have found a way to get the gold out of that mess, separate it and filter it out. So because it precipitates and is selective for gold only, this doesn't happen for silver, platinum, palladium, or similar shaped molecules. It also doesn't happen for gold chloride, or it also doesn't happen for beta or gamma cyclodextrin. So this is very, very specific to gold. So we found a way to get around the cyanide and mercury issues, and this wimpy way is what I went with. But does it work in the lab? After about a year of knocking around the lab, that's the gold nanoparticle that I said it looks like red wine. I simulated, this is not real waste, I just made it up in the lab. And this is what I use to simulate the recovery step. So typically when we get the nano waste into those vessels for hazardous waste treatment, they precipitate out. I then redissolve it in hydrobromic acid and nitric acid to get the bromine into the system. Remember, bromine is what we need. And then I change the pH using potassium hydroxide, which got the potassium in the system. So now, with the right pH, after I added the cyclodextrin, separated it out as this fluffy precipitate. So now the gold is separate. I then filter that out, but the gold is now bound to the cyclodextrin, which I don't want. And then resuspended that using sonication, and then selectively precipitated gold using sodium metabisulfite. Now I redissolve that gold in aqua regia, which is hydrochloric acid and nitric acid. That's basically gold salt that we made the nanoparticles in the first place. And then I reduced it using a different variety of chemicals, and all of them started to give gold nanoparticles. Now it's not as clean as it looks. It's not as easy as it looks, but there are lots of impurities in there. But still, we got most of the gold out. Now, the experimentalist in me needs to believe that what we have is really gold. So we'll take a look at this and this piece. Let's see if the gunk that we got precipitated out, is it really gold? So we ran X-ray diffraction on that sample. All these red stars correspond to fingerprints for gold. The others are due to impurities, which I still haven't found a name for. But it's convincing information that what we have is really gold. Next, that solution that I prepared when we ran a UV spectroscopy, it lines up very closely to the stock standard solution for gold chloride. And finally, we looked at those nanoparticles. This is what they looked like because they were still coalescing and they were still precipitating when I was sampling them. But if you looked at the crystal structure, this de-spacing is just a sort of fingerprint indicator of the crystal structure for gold. This is the calculated crystal structure I got. If you look at these numbers, they match very closely, and it's sort of clinching evidence that what we have is gold. So we can do this. But having had the previous crisis of faith with green chemistry, is it worth it? Does the life cycle assessment make sense? So I go back into the life cycle assessment, which is again a brand new field for me, but I found the software SeamerPro and modeled the synthesis step like this. Instead of citrate, I could plug in any other reducing agent. And remember this recovery step, that's what we modeled as a recycling. And we put the synthesis piece with the recycling piece and random models. Now the actual real model is a little more beautiful. This is for a simulated case of 90% recovery, meaning, when I say 90% recovery, meaning 90% of that gold in that waste is now sent back to make new nanoparticles, and 10% is sent to hazardous waste treatment. In our case, in our lab, that hazardous waste treatment is waste incineration. And I just bring your attention to the two inputs for gold. That's the gold being mined. That's the input from the mined gold, and the green stream is the recycled gold. So as the recovery of the recycling percentage decreases, one will become thinner, the other will become thicker. That's what is expected. And the actual data shows that if there's no recycling, this is how the metal depletion potential shows up as. And the more you recycle, the better it is. This is all from recipe midpoint. And the same trends are seen for human toxicity, marine toxicity, and freshwater toxicity, which were the most significant impacts. But again, it's not as clean as it looks. It turns out that the fossil fuel depletion and the climate change potential stack up like this. And I was surprised because most of the impact should have been tied to gold. If I'm recovering much of it, why is this happening? So something must be going on in the recovery step. So we looked at the data again, and this step, where I'm redissolving the gold, the part I didn't tell you was I redissolved the gold in this hydrochloric acid and nitric acid mixture, but then to go beyond the next step, I had to get rid of the nitric acid. And in a crude way, I just boiled off that nitric acid. And it's that boiling step at the lab scale that messed up everything. So if this is the model, that piece, that thick line that you see, that's all the energy input going into that boiling. It takes about an hour. That's a very bad way to do this. But because it's a lab scale study, I was quite happy with that. And so most of that impact was tied to this, but it's a solvable problem. I'm boiling, preparing a single batch of recovered gold and boiling off that batch. I could just consolidate multiple batches, so the per batch, hence the per milligram, impact will go down. Plus, this is also something that will be taken care of upon scale scenarios, because it's a lab scale thing. When you compare it with pilot scale or industrial scale processes, the boiling doesn't account much. So to conclude, can we do it? Yes. Does it make sense from a life cycle point of view? Perhaps. Challenges, reducing that energy footprint from this boiling step, which, as I said, perhaps is a solvable problem. But the other thing, I was presenting at a different conference, and Callie Babbitt, she pointed me out that this gold that I'm recovering will never be as clean as what Sigma Orbit sells or any chemical company sells. So perhaps a better way to do this is to not model it as a closed loop recycling, but as an open loop recycling. The recovered gold goes into a different stream, rather than my own gold nanoparticles. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. But with that, I'd like to thank my collaborators and funding sources, and we'll be happy to take questions.
questions?
Thank you for the chemistry too. I enjoyed the elegance of that. The 2 point, where does the cyclodextrin come from?
I buy it from some knowledge.
But do you have a profile for it? It's not an eco invent, is my guess.
It's not. I built it up.
Yeah.
From
And how did that sort of fit into it? Into the profile, into the impact?
It was
pretty small.
Almost negligible.
Okay.
And the other thing is, it's not only is it negligible from an environmental point of view, it's also very cheap. And it's also recoverable. I don't recover it, but it can be recrystallized out. If you are really gung-ho about getting it out, you can get it out.
Okay, I suppose if P&G sprays it in the air. Yes. Okay, and second part is, this is a stretch. Why limit it to recycling? Why not put it into mining?
That is what I'm trying to sell it to my thesis committee. That's how I'm trying to sell it. The part that I don't like is the very first step requires redissolving everything in a bunch of acid. I cannot get around that. But let's say something like e-waste.
Yeah.
Now, we have to get the gold out one way or the other. And getting it out from that embedded form has to involve some messy ways. One of them might be acids. But the subsequent steps, if we can get around the cyanide or the mercury steps, this seems like a good way to do it. But I haven't had any studies that did it on a big scale. The paper that I cited was first reported this chemistry. They tried it with small amounts of bulk gold and silver nano waste. Silver actual, no nano waste, bulk waste. And they had significant success in getting it selectively out. But yeah, mining, if you can get around the acid problem, if you can have a closed loop acid recycling, it might work.
So talking about scale, can you explain or comment on regarding nano waste? What kind of amount are we talking about?
This is really specific to my nano waste. And all the chemistry experiments were done in just for the waste I generate. But if we look at how much nanomaterial, gold or metal-based nanoparticles are being generated in different laboratories, academic and government labs, this is not a small number then. I don't know how big it is. But given how high recovery percentage that I get, it seems like an easy way to get stuff out instead of sending it to incineration or sending it to hazardous waste and trying to get it out from there. But I don't have a sense of scale how big of an industry we're talking about.
Well,
if I were
compare with e-waste, 30 volts.
E-waste
is
a huge one. Nano is insignificant, perhaps, if we compare to even say jewelry or e-waste. So the chemistry is fun, but I would want to apply this to a bigger system rather than just nanomaterial waste.
Eventually, you want your process to be robust, so you can handle all different kinds of gold in Otherwise, likely for economics.
Right. I mean, the economics won't make sense for nano waste, perhaps. There's a lot of money or energy involved in just getting the waste to a facility and you get 1 milligram of gold out of 20 liters of waste. It might not make sense.
One last question.
So is this process limited by your particle size and what fits into that cyclodextrin, or could you theoretically have larger gold particles and do this same recovery?
This is not limited by that thing that's revolving. That's just one gold molecule. So as long as that gold is in the system as gold ion, there is no particle size limitation for that. So this is not nanoparticle that's spinning. Those yellow things are just gold bromide molecules.
Okay.
So if you have a necklace or a ring of gold and you dissolve that, that will also do this.
Thank you.
All right, Param, thank you so much.